Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Gaurav Rishi. I am the VP of Product at Caston by Beam. And now, as a part of Beam, Caston is super happy to talk to you about Kubernetes ransomware protection. In fact, with version 4.0 of Caston K10 recently announced, we believe we are the first ones in the industry to go ahead and give you a solution like this. So let's go right under the hood to figure out what we are doing and why we are doing it. I don't think I need to tell this audience about how important ransomware protection is. Hardly a day goes by when you don't hear of a meat processing plant getting hacked and held to ransom, or your oil fuel lines getting disrupted. And so you've had ransomware on a growing vector, which is affecting a lot of the traditional applications. But along with it, as Kubernetes applications increase, both in the number of applications that you see deployed across the world, as well as the magnitude of those applications. So the number of Kubernetes applications that we see across multiple clusters, the number of worker nodes are all on a tear and they're all increasing. And what that results in is a lot of malicious attacks now going after these Kubernetes applications, which includes ransomware attacks. So we need to make sure that we have a solution that works not only for traditional solutions or traditional applications, but also for cloud-native applications that run in Kubernetes environments. So the next question which comes up is really, why is it different to go ahead and have a Kubernetes ransomware protection solution? And the answer to that is several points, but I'll touch on a few. As you probably know, the deployment patterns in a traditional application, let's say a hypervisor-based application, is going ahead and backing up your particular hypervisor. That's a self-contained environment where you have your application, your operating system, your config files. But when you talk about a cloud-native application, that itself is made up of multiple microservices. And those microservices are scheduled on different nodes, which may or may not be running hypervisors. And to add to the complexity, those particular microservices are constantly getting rescheduled between different worker nodes. So your unit of atomicity in terms of what you need to back up changes from a hypervisor to an actual cloud-native application and all of the underlying constructs that go with it. The second point I'll touch on is the scale change as a result of it. So once you make your unit of atomicity of what you need to back up, the application not only includes the microservices, like I said, but also all of the Kubernetes objects that go alongside that contain the networking, compute, storage information, whether it's your config maps or your secrets. And so that results in a massive difference in terms of the number of objects that you need to go ahead and protect. And so when you think of a protection solution in this environment for Kubernetes, you need to work in a brand new environment, which has a different ecosystem at a scale that you've never seen before, and in a dynamic environment where it's not just the rescheduling point that I talked about, but also in a DevOps working environment. So it's not just a technology shift, it's also an operations shift where people expect self-service portals and they want to move very quickly in terms of being able to figure out what should be the right protection policies, and then also not get bottlenecked in terms of going and opening support tickets when time comes to recover from these applications. So those are some of the points which lead me to point out why Kubernetes ransomware protection solutions are different from what you might have seen in traditional environments. The next question which comes up is, well, what makes Kubernetes applications vulnerable to ransomware? And now there are multiple reasons out here. It starts with making sure that when you run your applications or create your applications in terms of the code, you might be using lots of open source libraries. So it's always good hygiene to make sure that you have scanning tools, etc. However, even let's say you have an application that you do trust, Kubernetes is a young ecosystem. And what we see is a lot of times there is incorrect or over permissions that are set up for a particular application. And this could happen at installation time, and that might be exploited at runtime, either maliciously or accidentally, which leads to a negative effect on the clusters. In the context of ransomware, we do see people exploiting this attack surface to go ahead and get control of your entire cluster or the entire application, and then having malicious attacks on that. The second point is, in this dynamic environment, Kubernetes itself comes up with a new release every quarter. So it's extremely important to make sure that you stay up to date with these releases. But it's not just a quarterly granularity. In addition to the Kubernetes versions getting upgraded, there are sometimes critical vulnerabilities or CVEs. And these exploits have patches that many of the good vendors go ahead and make sure that they give in a very short period of time. I know Cast K10, we reach out to our customers, we publish blogs to make sure that people know about it and can patch the systems. So the onus is both on the vendors who are creating these applications to make sure that they're setting out these CVEs and informing folks, as well as on the enterprise side, the onus is to make sure that you are going ahead and updating a system. And if you don't, that leads you to some vulnerabilities. And then third, it always surprises me that even with all of this known, backup turns out to be a last line of defense, but many applications are not protected by a backup policy. In fact, many enterprises don't have a Kubernetes backup and recovery solution in place. So as these ransomware attacks become more sophisticated, not only are they going ahead and destroying the clusters and the applications there, they're also going out and destroying, at times, the target solutions or the target storage if you have not gone ahead and kept a Kubernetes backup and recovery solution in place. So first of all, make sure you have your best practices in place, have a backup and recovery solution that is meant for this Kubernetes environment, and that will get us at least a little better in terms of where we are today as an industry. Now, let's talk about when we went out to our customers and asked them that, given the increase in terms of your Kubernetes applications and the fact that we need to go ahead and make sure we have a backup and recovery solution, what are the key requirements that we need to have from a solution like that? And the first one turns out to be backup integrity. Like I pointed out, backup is your last line of defense. And so it's extremely important to make sure that your backed up data, in which case it's the entire application, is something that you can rely on and recover from, and it's not touched, whether it's because of malicious attacks or whether it's because of an accidental deletion. So that is point number one. Second, when it comes to ransomware attacks, usually the cost of what your ransom is goes up as time goes on. And so it's extremely important to go ahead and have short recovery times so that you can also work in an environment which is high pressure. Typically, when you have a ransomware attack, your operations team needs to be able to work at scale across multiple clusters in all of these hybrid environments that span cloud and multiple on-premises locations in a varied infrastructure from vendors providing you storage and Kubernetes distributions and data services. So these are complex cloud-native applications, but your operations need to be extremely simple when time comes for you to back up, as well as easily recover in case you're under attack or you've been held to ransom. And then finally, all the customers came back and said they want the solution to be cost effective. You cannot just go ahead and have something where you're tied to a certain vendor, whether it's a cloud provider or whether it's one of the infrastructure vendors, which states that you are going to have a ransomware protection solution, but only if you use our products. That doesn't really get the ransom out of the ransomware. And so with these four key requirements in place, what we as Kasten by Veeam have done, especially with Kasten K10 version 4.0, is introduced, like I said, the industry's first ransomware protection solution for Kubernetes. And the unique approach that we have taken is, first of all, we support immutability. This addresses the point I had made earlier to make sure that you can rely on your backup target storage locations to contain the information that you are actually stored in them. So with integrations that go along with S3 from Amazon, we have been able to go ahead and keep worm support, which is write once, read many. You can set a flag which says that you want to enable immutability. And then you can also go ahead and set a retention period in your policies, which says how long does your application need to stay protected. And even if somebody takes administrative control of your application or of the bucket, they will not be able to go ahead and overwrite on that. So this makes sure that you have a recovery time during which you know that your application data is going to be completely safe. Now, I pointed out that you need to have short recovery times because ransomware costs go up. And that's where Custom K10 is unique in terms of being able to set up policies that can be then tied to applications. What these policies allow you to do is set up backup frequencies where they should be stored, maybe in this immutable S3 target store as an example. We of course support other object stores, whether it's a MinIO on premises, as well as others. And then we can also make these policies forward-looking. And what I mean by that is, as soon as an application is introduced into a cluster, cast and K10 policies can automatically discover an application has been added, figure out what the dependency map of that application is in terms of what the persistent volume claims, Kubernetes objects that are associated with it are, and when it backs up all of them on an ongoing basis. In addition to that, you can also have blueprints and policies for going ahead and recovering. And so that makes your job extremely easy because you're relying on automation when you're working in a high pressure environment of being able to respond to an attack or recover from an attack. Hence simplicity, not only in terms of going ahead and making sure that you have an application like Custom K10 that can set up in less than 10 minutes and start protecting your applications, but can work at scale across multiple locations and clusters is extremely important. And then finally, from the perspective of keeping the ransom out of ransomware, where we are not tying you to a particular vendor, is at the heart of the design. Custom K10 works across various types of vendors, whether it's a variety of storage vendors, and we have deep integrations into most of them, whether it's direct or through CSI interfaces. But in addition to that, we also have integrations into Kubernetes distributions, whether it's public cloud providers or whether it's on-premises where you have people like Red Hat OpenShift, as well as on the public cloud side, you might have Amazon EKS or Azure AKS. We also have gone ahead and as a part of Custom K10, made sure we have the next generation data engine under the covers, which gives you additional level of efficiency and security in terms of making sure that we take the minimal amount of footprint. And if you go back to the original slide when I was talking about over permissions, we ourselves run in restricted permissions as Custom K10. So you make sure that Custom K10 can operate only on things that you have actually given explicit permission for it to work on. It runs in the same cluster as where your applications are running, and the data stays with you or wherever you want it to be backed up to if you decide to go ahead and have applications like DR and move it to an offsite, which is a good location. So with these 4 points, I do want to stress that Custom K10 provides you an easy way to go ahead and get you up and protected in a Kubernetes environment from a ransomware protection perspective. And how easy is it? It's a 2-step process. Once you've got Custom K10, when you're going ahead and setting up your target store, in this particular case, an object store, you just need to go ahead and enable immutability that you see listed out here. In addition to that, you need to set a protection period. In this case, it's listed as 8 days. We add a minimum of 21 days out here. And this makes sure that you go ahead and actually have nobody being able to touch your application during this time, and that provides for easy security. Now, with the few minutes that we have, let's look at a quick demo to demonstrate how we can go ahead and enable ransomware protection for Kubernetes using Custom K10. So for this demo, let's assume that you have a Kubernetes cluster and your application is running on that cluster. The application data is on MySQL Server, and of course, that's connected through a persistent volume claim. And let's also assume that you're going ahead and setting up a policy that can back up your application frequently. And in addition to that, you're exporting the backed up data to an external storage system, in this case, an S3. And remember, I had said we will, in this case, enable the object locking so that you do have permanence to the data with immutability. So let's switch over now to the Kasten K10 dashboard to see how we can get this done. So this is the Kasten K10 dashboard. And as you can see, we have my production application out here. And if I look under the covers, there's about 1 gigabit of data. Under the covers, when I click on my production app, there is SQL Server which is running. When I look at SQL Server, there's a table that we have created, and that actually has some data just to demonstrate that this is before the attack. We can go ahead and see that there is information, and let's assume this is critical information that we need to make sure is recoverable. And now the second thing we go ahead and make sure we do is create a policy. And we need to go ahead and let's call this a lock policy. This is for my production application, and it's getting snapshotted every hour. And you are also exporting that hourly snapshot to an external storage. And that external storage here, in this case, is AWS S3. And when I go look at that AWS S3, you can see that object locking is enabled. And the protection period in this particular case for this demonstration is set to 30 days, which means that it's immutable, whatever is being backed up, and as it gets refreshed for 30 days after that point. Now, let's assume you've got that application, your My Production app, with the profile set up, so you're automatically going ahead and have that object locking enabled in that S3 profile, and you're going and backing up your application and exporting it. Now, let's assume you are under attack. Attacker has gone ahead and compromised your Kubernetes cluster as well as your S3 credentials. So not only do they go ahead and encrypt your data, they also go and delete all the restore points on S3, which is what you were using as your target storage when you exported the data. And what we'll go ahead and show is that when we detect that that attack has taken place, if we had not gone ahead and done object locking, we would not be able to recover. But in this particular case, because we had set up Kasten K10 profiles and the policies to use that, we can actually go ahead and restore that particular bucket content and get that SQL Server back on. So I switch back to my SQL workbench, and I can see that the data actually has been encrypted. So the ransomware attacker has been successful, and they've gone ahead and encrypted all the contents that I showed you that we had created in there. However, now also when I go to the S3 console, you can see that we don't see any objects listed out there because they had also gotten ahead and known the AWS credentials and been malicious to delete that. However, when I go and list versions on the S3 side, you can see under the Kasten K10 directory folder, you actually will have the contents available because we had set the immutability flag. So going back to my dashboard, I could just go choose my production application, click on restore application, and you can see that the exported restore points are actually available. And all I need to do is press restore to start the process. And you can track the process here on the particular dashboard. So we go and rehydrate the entire application and the underlying content accordingly. Now, in the interest of time, I've fast forwarded the time to show you that the restore application has successfully completed. Took a little more than 3 minutes. And now let's go back to my SQL workbench and see if the data actually has been restored. If you remember, it had been previously encrypted because the ransomware attacker had successfully gone ahead and encrypted it. But here is the data, and that just demonstrates that we can actually go ahead and successfully get back and recover very quickly, both from an S3 credential loss as well as on somebody taking over your credentials on the Kubernetes cluster side. So with that said, I hope you can see that Kasten K10 can completely protect your entire application. And to get started yourself, it just takes less than 5 minutes. All you need to do is go to the link below, or you can scan the QR code, and that gets you a Kasten K10, which is completely fully featured and lets you run 10 Kubernetes worker nodes for free. So hope this was useful and look forward to any questions that you might have.
All right, excellent presentation. Gaurav, you ready for some Q&A? Well, while we bring Gaurav on the line here, I do want to point out that I brought up a poll question for everyone out there in the audience that says, do you have Kubernetes in production today with a data protection project? Gaurav, are you there?
I am here.
Excellent. Great to have you. I really enjoyed the demo there. That was cool to see Kasten in action. I hadn't seen it myself before, so that was great to see. Thank you for sharing that.
All right. No, thank you. Glad to be able to quickly show it. I know it was a bird's eye view, but I do encourage people to try it out themselves too.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's cool that you provided a link there for folks to go do that. We've got some questions for you. And while we do that, I've just brought up the poll question that says, do you have Kubernetes in production today with a data protection project? And we'll leave that up there while we take a couple of your questions, and then we move on to our next poll. So let's see, first question, they're asking, does Kasten provide service for NoSQL or protection for NoSQL Server as well?
So the short answer is yes. So the way Kasten works is it works for a variety of SQL as well as NoSQL data services that can be protected. And in fact, it can be extended using what we call blueprints. So if you have some custom requirements in terms of pre-hooks or post-hooks, we also support that. And there are common sort of data services that we see in the deployed in the cloud native world today, whether it's a Mongo or a NoSQL, et cetera. We've got blueprints for them already created, and they are freely available on the open source community. You can actually check out canister.io, and you can see some of these blueprints out there. So we do support data services backup, and also we support, obviously, backup at the storage level.
Very nice. Very nice. Let's see another question from Guy who's asking, does Kasten work with a managed solution like Azure Kubernetes Service or GCP?
Yeah, so I think the short answer again there is yes. Guy, the Kasten K10 is qualified. In fact, we have nightly builds and automated tests which go and qualify it with a variety of managed Kubernetes distributions. This is, your hyperscalers, so definitely GCP, GKE on Google, AKS on Azure, definitely EKS on Amazon, and then also Red Hat OpenShift and the variants there of things like ARO, which is Azure Red Hat OpenShift, in addition to obviously a variety of Kubernetes distributions that we have deeply integrated on the on-premises side also primarily. So HPE Ezmeral as an example of that, in addition to upstream Kubernetes. So a wide variety of choice there. Very nice.
Very nice. And then let's see, next question. They want to know, what's the relationship between Kasten K10 and Veeam? Is it an add-on product for Veeam? Are these two separate products? How does that work?
Okay, good question. So Kasten K10 is an independent product. In fact, Kasten K10, Kasten by itself, just as a quick company brief, is an independent business unit inside Veeam. We are definitely an integral part of Veeam as a company. However, Kasten K10, which is the core product, can be run independently. It does not require Veeam. But we have announced, and some of you might have attended the VeeamON conference a few weeks ago, where we've also talked about how if you have, for example, VBR, the Veeam Backup and Replication solution, you can use Kasten K10 to write into that. So independent, but if you do want to go ahead and store your content into VBR, that is an option that's coming out also.
Very nice. That's cool. Exciting new functionality or integration there coming soon. So I've just brought up a poll question for everyone out there. Again, that says, what additional information would you like about the Kasten solution? And we appreciate your response to that while we take your questions. Next question here, Bing is asking, what is the retention policy of the backups, that Kasten would take of the Kubernetes infrastructure? And I assume you can configure that?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I know I flew past the demo in that. In fact, one of the screens actually showed that you can go ahead and have a configurable policy of, how the snapshot should be taken, how long they should be, retained in terms of number of days. And then, in fact, you can also set up a separate retention policy even for the exported snapshots, which make them more resilient, and we call those backups, right? So you can independently set that also. So both configurable, and they come with some default values, which we look at best practices.
Very nice. Bradford is asking, does Casting K10 support air gapping for private networks or sites?
Yeah, no, Bradford, that's a good question. Actually, a very sort of common requirement. We definitely see lots of enterprises using that in Casting K10. So yes, we do support air-gapped installs. So you don't need to have, quote unquote, internet connection to get K10 up and running or to operate it. And, extremely important and topical given the conversation we're having around ransomware anyway. So yes to answer your question.
Absolutely. And then here's a good question. They're asking, where do you recommend we go for more about Kubernetes ransomware recovery and the K10 solution?
So I see from your previous poll, there are a lot of people who seem to be experimenting with Kubernetes and not in production today. So first of all, I think for learning about Kubernetes, if you go to the handout section, we do have a guide around getting started with Kubernetes. I think that's a good resource to start off with. Personally, when I started with Kubernetes, I did go to, FIPI, the CNCF website has FIPI related resources, which is an easy to read kids sort of cartoon type thing. So go to fipi.io, I believe. And that's a good way to get started also as your nighttime reading. As far as the ransomware solutions are concerned, good way to go is the caston.io/resources. I will also try and see if I can paste a specific link which talks about some of the technical details and more detailed demos that people can look at and share. Maybe we can also distribute that after the fact.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have in our live Q&A session here. There's some more technical questions I've posted for you in the queue electronically. But Gaurav, great presentation. Thank you so much for being on the event today.
Thank you. Pleasure. All right. Have a nice day.